Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Sarah had always been careful about privacy. Growing up in a house full of siblings, she'd learned the importance of locked doors and quiet moments. So when she moved in with her best friend Emma and Emma's older brother Jake as roommates, she made sure to establish boundaries. Clear, simple boundaries that everyone understood. That life has a way of making even the most careful people vulnerable. At the worst possible moments, the rain hammered against the windows of their shared apartment that Tuesday evening, creating a rhythm that matched the nervous beating of Sarah's heart. She'd just returned from what might have been the most disastrous job interview of her life, the kind where you know, within the first 5 minutes, that you've already lost before you've even begun. Her white blouse was soaked through from the unexpected downpour, clinging to her skin in a way that made her shiver. The fabric had become nearly transparent, and all she wanted was to get out of her wet clothes and into something warm and dry. Emma was working late at the hospital. Her nursing shifts often stretched into the night, and Jake was supposed to be at his evening classes. The apartment should have been empty, safe, private. Sarah made her way to her bedroom, leaving a trail of water droplets on the hardwood floor. She peeled off her soggy blazer and let it fall to the ground with a wet thud. The interview had been for a position at a prestigious marketing firm downtown, something she'd been dreaming about for months. But the moment she'd walked in, everything had gone wrong. Wrong answers, wrong energy, wrong everything. She began unbuttoning her blouse, her fingers trembling slightly. Whether from the cold or from the stress of the day, she wasn't sure. The fabric stuck to her skin, and she had to work it off slowly, piece by piece. She was down to her white camisole and pencil skirt when she heard the front door open. "Emma?" she called out, continuing to undress. "You're home early." But there was no response. Just the sound of keys hitting the wooden bowl by the entrance, the familiar creak of the floorboards, and footsteps heading toward the kitchen. Sarah shrugged and continued changing. If Emma was tired, she probably didn't feel like talking anyway. She slipped out of her skirt and reached for a soft, oversized sweater from her dresser. That's when she realized she'd forgotten to grab clean underwear from the laundry room. Standing there in just her camisole and underwear, she debated whether to just put on the sweater or make a quick dash to get fresh clothes. The decision was made for her when she heard a voice from the kitchen. "Sarah, are you home?" It wasn't Emma's voice. It was Jake's. Deep, warm, with that slight rasp that came from years of singing in coffee shops during his college years. Sarah's heart stopped for exactly 3 seconds. I'm in my room," she called back, her voice smaller than she intended. "I brought Chinese food," Jake continued, his voice getting closer. "I know you had that interview today, and I thought you might be hungry when you got back." Sarah's eyes widened as she heard his footsteps coming down the hallway. She grabbed for her sweater, but in her panic, she knocked over a glass of water on her nightstand. The crash echoed through the apartment, followed by the sound of her bedroom door opening. "Are you okay?" I heard. Time stopped. Jake stood in the doorway, his dark hair damp from the rain, holding 2 bags of Chinese takeout. His eyes, usually so warm and friendly, went wide with shock. Sarah stood frozen beside her bed, one arm reaching for her sweater, the other instinctively moving to cover herself. For a moment that felt like an eternity, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. But in that small bedroom, with its soft yellow walls and scattered clothes, the world had narrowed down to just the 2 of them. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. A blush so deep it seemed to start from her toes and work its way up. She'd known Jake for 3 years, had shared countless meals and movie nights and casual conversations. But she'd never seen him look at her the way he was looking at her now. His eyes didn't leer or make her feel uncomfortable. Instead, there was something else there. Something she'd never allowed herself to notice before. A softness, a longing, a question that had been hanging in the air between them for longer than either of them had realized. "I'm sorry," Jake said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't immediately look away. "I didn't know you were ... It's okay," Sarah replied, though her voice was shaky. She reached for her sweater again, but this time she moved slowly, almost deliberately. "I thought you were Emma." Jake's eyes followed her movements, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. The embarrassment was still there, but underneath it was something else, an electricity she'd never felt before, a tension that made her skin feel hypersensitive to the cool air. "I should go," Jake said, but he didn't move from the doorway. "You should," Sarah agreed, that she didn't cover herself any more than she already had. They stood there for another moment, the weight of 3 years of friendship and carefully maintained boundaries hanging between them. Sarah had always found Jake attractive. It was impossible not to. He was tall and lean, with artist's hands and eyes that seemed to see more than most people's. But he was Emma's brother, her roommate, her friend. He was off limits in every way that mattered. But now, standing there in her underwear with his eyes on her, Sarah felt those boundaries begin to blur. "The food will get cold," Jake said eventually, though he still didn't move. "Chinese food is good cold," Sarah replied, surprised by her own boldness. A small smile tugged at the corner of Jake's mouth. "Is it?" "Some of it," Sarah said finally, pulling her sweater over her head. The soft cashmere felt warm against her skin, but it did nothing to cool the heat that was building inside her. Jake watched her get dressed, and Sarah let him. There was something intimate about it, something that felt both innocent and charged at the same time. When she was fully covered, he finally stepped back from the doorway. "I'll be in the kitchen," he said, "if you want to eat." After he left, Sarah sat on her bed and tried to process what had just happened. Her heart was still racing, and her skin felt flushed and warm. She'd lived with Jake for 8 months, and in all that time, she'd never felt the kind of attraction she was feeling right now. Maybe it had always been there, she thought. Maybe she'd just been too careful, too focused on maintaining the status quo, to let herself feel it. But now that the barrier had been broken, now that he'd seen her in her most vulnerable state, there was no going back. She found him in the kitchen, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. He'd changed out of his wet clothes and into a soft grey t-shirt and jeans. His hair was still damp, and Sarah had the strangest urge to run her fingers through it. "How did the interview go?" he asked, not looking at her directly. "Terrible," Sarah said, accepting a plate from him. "I think I might have accidentally insulted the hiring manager." Jake laughed, and the sound eased some of the tension in the room. "I'm sure it wasn't that bad." "It was pretty bad," Sarah said, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "I told her that their last campaign looked like it was designed by someone who'd never seen a color wheel." "Ouch," Jake said, sitting across from her. "Did you really say that?" "I was nervous," Sarah said, spearing a piece of chicken with her fork. "I say stupid things when I'm nervous." "I've never noticed that about you," Jake said, and this time he did look at her directly. "You always seem so composed." Sarah felt her cheeks warm again. "I'm good at hiding it." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the awkwardness of the earlier moment settling into something softer, more intimate. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Jake, noticing things about him she'd never allowed herself to see before. The way his fingers wrapped around his chopsticks, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the way he chewed thoughtfully, as if he was savoring each bite. "Sarah," Jake said suddenly, setting down his chopsticks. "About what happened earlier. We don't have to talk about it," Sarah said quickly. "Maybe we should," Jake said. "I mean, I know it was an accident. That what?" Sarah asked, her heart beginning to race again. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him, struggling with something. Finally, he looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I've been thinking about you," he said quietly. "More than I should. More than a friend should." Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. "Jake. I know it's complicated," he continued. "I know Emma would probably kill us both if she knew. But seeing you today, like that. I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel something." Sarah felt her world tilt slightly. She'd spent so long keeping her own feelings buried, so long pretending that the flutter in her stomach when Jake smiled at her was just friendly affection, that now, with his confession hanging in the air between them, she realized she'd been lying to herself. "I feel it too," she whispered. The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a line they were both about to cross. Jake reached across the island and took her hand, his fingers warm and slightly rough from his weekend job at the woodworking shop. "This is crazy," Sarah said, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But crazy might be exactly what we need." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing small circles on her skin. She thought about Emma, about friendship and loyalty, and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But she also thought about the way Jake had looked at her earlier, the way he was looking at her now, and the way her heart felt like it might burst out of her chest. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake stood up and walked around the island, stopping just in front of her stool. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I'd like to find out." Sarah felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something that could either destroy everything or change her life forever. She thought about the job interview, about all the ways her life felt like it was falling apart. Maybe this was exactly the kind of beautiful disaster she needed. "Emma's working a double shift," Sarah said quietly. "She won't be home until tomorrow morning." Jake's eyes darkened slightly. "Sarah. I'm not saying we should do anything," Sarah said quickly. "I'm just saying we have time to talk, to figure this out." Jake nodded slowly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "We should talk." But instead of talking, he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. Sarah answered by kissing him back, her hands finding the soft fabric of his t-shirt and holding on when they broke apart. Both of them were breathing hard. Sarah felt dizzy with want and confusion, and the terrifying thrill of stepping into the unknown. "We should definitely talk," Jake said, his forehead resting against hers. "We should," Sarah agreed, and then she kissed him again. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. And inside their small apartment, with Chinese food growing cold on the counter and wet clothes forgotten on the bedroom floor, Sarah and Jake began to discover what it meant to stop hiding from the truth. The sound of Sarah's phone buzzing on the counter broke them apart. Emma's name flashed on the screen, and reality came crashing back. "I should answer that," Sarah said, her voice breathless. "You should," Jake agreed. But neither of them moved. The phone stopped buzzing, then started again. This time, Jake stepped back, giving Sarah space to breathe and think. "Hey, Em," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady as she answered. "Hey, how did the interview go?" Emma's voice was tired but cheerful. "I've been thinking about you all day." Sarah looked at Jake, who was watching her with an expression that was part guilt, part longing, and part something else she couldn't quite name. "It went ... Sarah paused, searching for the right words. "It didn't go the way I expected." "Oh no," Emma said. "I'm so sorry. Listen, I'm stuck here for another few hours. But when I get home tomorrow, we'll order pizza and watch terrible movies and trash talk that company until you feel better." "That sounds perfect," Sarah said, though her eyes never left Jake's face. "Is Jake home? I tried to call him earlier, but he didn't answer." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. He's here." "Good. I'm glad you're not alone after such a rough day. Make him cook for you. He owes me like 50 favors anyway." "I will," Sarah said, though she wondered if Emma would still feel that way if she knew what was really happening. After they hung up, Sarah and Jake stood in the kitchen, the weight of what they'd just shared settling between them, along with the reality of what it meant. "She's going to hate us," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe," Jake said. "Or maybe she understands that sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them." Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this feeling, this connection, was worth the risk. But as she looked at Jake, at this man who had somehow become so much more than just her roommate's brother, she realized that some choices change everything. And sometimes, you have to be brave enough to let them. The rain outside began to slow, and Sarah made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. She reached for Jake's hand, intertwining their fingers, and smiled. "So," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart, "what do you want to talk about first?" Jake smiled back, and Sarah saw her future reflected in his eyes. Uncertain, complicated, but full of possibility. "Everything," he said. "I want to talk about everything." And as the last drops of rain fell against the windows, they began to do exactly that, knowing that by morning nothing would ever be the same.